Hello and welcome to another edition of the DAV Data Solutions Data4SDG Thought Leaders interview series. Today, I'm thrilled to be chatting with Angus Middleton of Viridian Logic from the UK. Angus is a trailblazer in natural capital, and he's constantly innovated to solve client problems since 2004. He founded Viridian Logic in 2016 in order to create advanced pragmatic tools um, to create nature-based solutions and ecosystem services. Angus and Viridian have won many prestigious awards, and Angus was recently appointed an innovation advisor to the National Environmental Research Council of the UK, apart from being voted one of the top 20 eco heroes of 2010. So, welcome, Angus. We've known each other for quite some time, and I'm really thrilled to be chatting with you today.
Oh, me too, Harry. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So let's start with what Viridian does, and it's very centered around nature-based solutions. So, for the benefit of our audience, can you please expand a little bit on what nature-based solutions are, why they matter for sustainability and for climate action, and how Viridian uses data to create nature-based solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think to start off with nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, working with natural processes, all these kind of buzzwords are basically it's the idea of working with nature to deliver benefits to people, society, and business. The idea that enhancing nature will actually give us a lot of benefit. It's a good way forward. And it's essential for the sustainable development goals because it really puts the sustainable part in that. The whole of society, everything we do is based on natural systems. Clean water, plentiful water, the air, the food we eat, everything is based around natural systems. So as we're degrading those, and the double emergency here of declining nature and the climate emergency, it really coming to the fore now. If we carry on that way, society will be in trouble. So to make society sustainable, let alone develop sustainably, we have to get this right. We have to improve nature. And by doing so, we can give ourselves an awful lot of benefits from well-being through to economic boost.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
So, and by doing this, because we're enhancing nature, it's growing well, we're improving forests and the sea and mangroves. Actually, we'll be capturing a lot of carbon. So there's multiple benefits. And it's this, I think this is the core thing about nature-based solutions, is that single interventions give multiple wins to multiple people. So it ends up being a really cost-effective solution. And it's not, it doesn't have to be controversial because everyone can win.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating, Angus. You've given a few examples of different types of nature-based solutions, including mangroves, forests, and so on and so forth. Can you give a few more examples of these, as well as some sense of the history of nature-based solutions? Why are they coming to the prominence and the forefront now? I believe the 2018 UN World Water Report, in fact, was called Nature-Based Solutions for Water. So, can you tell us a little bit about these different types of nature-based solutions and the history of how they've come to the fore in terms of delivering sustainability co-benefits?
Yeah, and you're right about the UN report. I mean, it's a very exciting time, I think, now, because it's becoming mainstream. We're kind of finally getting there. But to answer your first question there about some examples around nature-based solutions, I was actually yesterday talking to some city officials from Colombia,
Yeah,
who are very keen to look at nature-based solutions for their city. And it is a great example because they have mangroves there, they have virgin forests and lovely grasslands all around them. And it's this multiple benefits. The idea that by maintaining those mangroves and the rest of the biodiversity in that area, not only is it going to be economically beneficial, the mangroves are very, very good for fish stocks, so there's an immediate benefit to people's livelihoods and food supply, but also it captures huge quantities of carbon and saves the city from being pounded by waves during storms. And it also is good for air quality for the city and helps reduce heat during heat waves. So it's all these multiple benefits, not only to the local populace, but the national and international community as well. So I think that's a really good example of how just looking in one location just conserving those natural habitats or improving them will have all of these multiple benefits for people and the economy at all scales. But then, so the history of nature-based solutions, how have we got to this point of understanding this stuff?
Yeah.
Well, it started about 20 years ago, where academics were first started to say, look, our economic system doesn't work because the whole of nature is just termed an externality. It's just written off, and we don't think about it. So some people, sort of at Stanford University, were quite leaders in this. So, well, why don't we think of nature as a capital, just like we have manufactured capital and human capital? Let's think about nature as a natural capital. And almost everyone hated it straight away. The environmentalists hated it because they thought we were just commoditizing nature to package it up and sell it. The economists hated it because they thought it was just greeny nonsense. And politicians hated it because they didn't understand it and they thought it was frivolous and expensive. But since then, since that time, we've had things like the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, TEEB, has come through, and the Natural Capital Project have been really sort of trailblazing on these issues. And slowly, more people have begun to understand it, more people have become to accept it. And we've got to the point now where it is becoming mainstream. People really do see that it can be such a good option. And sometimes it's the only option, because engineering just cannot get us out of all the trouble that we're in. And I think the pandemic has been, in some ways, good for nature. I mean, it's been a disaster globally in every other way, but it has made people realize actually we are entwined with nature, and that if we get it wrong, it really bites us. But also that our well-being is more important than just economic growth. So I think now we're really on the cusp of a change in mindset from everyone, from the politicians down to the individual on the street.
That's amazing, Angus. So I'm hearing that there's a kind of a journey of transformation which nature-based solutions are just starting to unleash, and with many different sort of, although the history has been, maybe there were different debates and so on and so forth on the applicability of nature-based solutions, we finally reached a point where they are starting to get practically deployed, and they have the potential to create multiple vast co-benefits, not just locally but nationally and internationally as well. So you talked, this is fascinating, you talked a little bit about the engineering mindset, and we also discussed about this before. I'd like to understand this in two different ways. So one is, you are an engineer yourself, but you are the kind of person who talks about participation, stakeholders, communities, co-benefits, and many many aspects which might not exactly be hard engineering. On the other hand, I know that Viridian logic actually employs some fairly quantitative, heavy statistical models in order to do what it does. So can you talk about this dynamic interplay between the heavy engineering, quantitative data science aspect of it, and the broader aspect of engaging stakeholders, and how the engineering mindset has to evolve, or has evolved in your case, in order to be more encompassing, especially when compared with the other kinds of offerings which might be there on the market?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think it comes down to systems thinking on this one. Nature-based solutions just isn't going to be the only way. It's not the only ticket in town. So we do need some nature reserves. We need some habitats to be conserved purely for their own benefit. And at the other end of the scale, we do need engineering solutions. Absolutely, we do need stuff to process our waste, to treat our water, and to help us protect against storms and floods and the like. So it all has to work together, but it's a difficult mesh, and we're just getting there. So I mean, at Viridian, because I'm an engineer by background, and Leon is actually a doctor of galactic astrophysics, so we kind of understand the heavy science and the heavy engineering end of the spectrum, and how we have to mesh this together, and that comes down to the right data in the right places and used in the right ways. I think the traditional engineering mindset, some of the big multinational engineering companies that are involved in lots of the sort of sustainable development projects are slow to evolve. They're big beasts, and it takes a long time for new ideas to trickle down through it. So a lot of projects they're involved in great projects, and they're doing great engineering that is necessary, but they could be made so much better if nature-based solutions were at the heart of them. And they're not, because the engineers look at the options, they'll look at nature and the catchments and the wider area, and they'll put it through their equations, their processes to say, if we plant trees there, if we create swamps over here, will it be safe? Will it do what we need it to do to a safety factor of 95%? And does it meet of all the sort of the engineering criteria that we need, all these safety factors, and will it always work under all conditions? And they can't prove that, so they write it off. And a few things get done just to tick a few boxes, and it's a bit of an afterthought, and it's, aren't we doing well? We've done a bit. But it could be embedded in the heart of it if they could understand how to integrate it into their engineering solutions. And I think that's where what we're trying to do in Viridian, and I think we're succeeding to a degree, is how to use data, how to use quantified and qualified estimates of benefits, so that we can integrate that both with the environmentalists and with the engineers. So it's trying to mesh it all together. The other problem with the traditional approaches is that it's very top down. So they'll tend to design something and then go and say, is this all right to the people, to the communities, to the guys that live on the land? And yeah, they'll have a bit of a discussion, and sometimes there's a real problem with that. And it has to go back to the drawing board, and it can take ages. But generally speaking, if people say no, they might tinker a little bit, and they'll do it anyway. So to a degree.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, Angus. What I'm hearing is that the traditional top-down heavy machinery, I mean, at least like in terms of the the data and so on and so forth, that approach doesn't actually serve the full, just bring the full benefits of natural capital, because it's so heavy. And perhaps you need a lighter approach, but there's also something to do with the lightness of approach with regard to how huge these international behemoths are when it comes to implementing these projects, and also the lightness which you might have to bring when bringing other stakeholders and other shareholders into the picture, so that you can factor in their inputs qualitative and quantitatively into the kinds of benefits which you deliver. So would I be correct in understanding that Viridian's platform actually provides the process which you use, a participatory process, identifies the right indicators, and then is also able to quantify these different co-benefits in terms of air pollution and, let's say, climate mitigation, or let's say like the other environmental services, ecosystem services which you provide? Are we getting there, or do you think that we're already there? I do know Viridian is at the forefront of innovation, but I'd really like to hear from you, especially like when it comes to these different aspects, right? Participation, different stakeholders who have different indicators of importance to them, the sustainable development agenda, and measurement, and these kinds of things. Do you think we're there, or do you think we're
getting there? We're definitely getting there. I mean, participatory design is at the heart of nature-based solutions. It has to be. It is best when it is co-designed, when the communities, the companies, the politicians can feel that they all own the solutions themselves. That way it can last into the long term. And to get there, you have to give the right information to different people.
Right.
So if we're talking to funders, whether it's commercial entities, someone who's looking to buy data or to insure areas of land or buildings or give loans out, whatever it is, investing in, and get returns on their investment,
yeah,
through natural capital, whatever we're looking at, different people need different things. So a funder will need to know that they're going to get a return on investment and have some idea of risk in there, which whereas politicians will need to know that it's not going to go disastrously wrong, and it's going to sort of more or less meet their objectives and their policy agenda, and communities need something they can understand and can work with. And these things are often very different for each thing. What Viridian does is we excel at water. And water, I think, is key to almost all of the sustainable development goals. So much is based around having enough water, but not too much water, and having it of a decent quality. And after that, everything else can follow. The problem with understanding nature-based solutions for water is that where you create the new habitats, where you create the natural systems or improve them or conserve them, is often very different to where the benefits are felt. There's a flow across the landscape through cities. And that's quite hard to model. And that's where our sort of engineering and mathematical background comes in, because it needs to be hydrological, it needs to be sort of map-based as well, it needs to use ecology, but also hard physics and hard engineering. So it needs to combine all of those elements together, which is kind of what we do. We're really getting there, I think, of being able to do this. And then we can bring everything else together. So things like carbon are have been worked on hard. We can quantify the benefits there really quite well. Air quality to a lesser degree, and water has always been left out, but we're getting there. We can quantify flooding quite well, and water quality and water quantities, recharging aquifers, helping with farming. We're getting to the point, I think, now where we can quantify all that, but also make it easy for communities to understand what to do where, how to do it, and what it will give to them.
That's pretty fascinating, Angus. So the way I'm understanding it is that you have this engine which is capable of doing these wonderful things, modeling flows and looking at how various ecosystem benefits from natural capital are obtained in different circumstances. And the other part from what I'm getting is from your conversation is I'm understanding that there are different stakeholders who need to see different things in order for their priorities to be met. And you mentioned, the politicians who need to understand that this is a worthwhile investment, perhaps without undue risk. You need the communities who need to see, perhaps quantitatively or qualitatively, what are the benefits which are accruing to them from this investment in their environs. But of course, corporates as well, and others as well. And it's really interesting that you talk about how these things are quantified to different stakeholders. So, for example, if we take the underlying theme of water, which is what Viridian focuses on, I believe water is of exceeding importance to corporates, because almost every business depends on water. Manufacturing, food and beverages, perhaps, textiles, all the different kinds of industries use water in one way or another. And from the corporate perspective, they may be really concerned about mitigating the risk, right? Or offsetting their their risk in some sense. And I know this is definitely a problem in India, where we are a water stressed market, for example, but we have major beverages companies and so on and so forth operating in places where it's already water stressed. So I have the feeling that deploying natural capital through approaches like Viridian would be great to become water positive around those kinds of communities, while also serving the needs of corporate stakeholders in terms of mitigating their water risks. So it's really interesting that you bring this in, because I feel one of the things perhaps we can talk about is how you need to create value for stakeholders in these in these sustainable development projects. So could you talk a little more about that in terms of returns on investment? Why is this required for sustainability? Why can't we just ask the government to fund everything? And where does data and the Viridian's approach to developing business models come in this kind of problem domain?
Yes, it's a good question, and I think you're very right to look at the finances behind this. There just isn't enough philanthropic or government funding to do everything we need to do. I mean, there is a huge problem that's been building this, and it's still increasing, and we need to turn that around. We need to get nature back into a functioning state, so that we can maximize the benefits we get from it, and that's going to take a while, and it will take all stakeholders, all parts of society to be involved in that. But it needs to be funded commercially. We live in a largely capitalist world, and the only way we can make these sorts of projects last into the long term is to make them financially viable, commercially attractive. And luckily they generally are. I mean, it's once people understand all the benefits they can get from it, that actually they are good investments. And I think even people like BlackRock have come out and said this, that if you invest in nature, you get huge returns on your money.
Yeah.
These are capitalists to their very hearts, and for them to come out and say this is a great idea, it's really kind of shows that it is. And so this is where sort of the use of data comes in, because we have to be able to show to different organizations what they will get their returns on investment, why it is good for them. And that sometimes it can be through ESG, environmental, social and government reporting. This idea of reputation can be very, very important to many corporates, but also the sort of the wider license to operate idea. Saying about sort of water in areas. I know Coca-Cola have come up against this problem where they've abstracted too much water, and then everyone hates them.
They face this problem in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu, as a matter of fact. Of course, you know this, yeah.
So yeah, and this is why nature-based solutions can be so good, because you do small actions over very large areas that will improve people's lives in many, many ways, as well as in sort of holding water back so that farmers can use that. So there's more water that other people can abstract, and that if you're Coca-Cola, for instance, you can abstract it too. So there's enough water there. And these business models they're difficult, they're tricky, but we're getting there, I think. And it is understanding what people need. How can you leverage these interventions? And I was going back to this Colombia conversation I had yesterday again. And I know we've been working on stuff in India, but that's maybe a bit of it was looking amazing. But in Colombia, my latest discussion, there is big opportunities there, but it needs to be leveraged at all scales. So we need to gather data on where the habitats are and what they're doing. What are they currently providing? And we can use satellite data to do that. And we can use local data. We can put low-cost sensors out, and we can gather all this data that we need. A lot of it exists, but a lot of it doesn't. We can then look and say, okay, what are the problems locally, and what are the problems nationally and internationally, and how can we leverage that? Now, one of the things they need in this city in Colombia is more investment into the local economies. Now, we can do that by getting local people to actually implement the nature-based solutions, to actually grow the plants, to plant the trees, to dig the holes, to sort of put the gravel in, to hold water back in lots of these little places all around the city and into the catchment. So that's where the money can go into the economy. But where will we get that from? Well, probably seed funding to start with, from the NGOs or the government. But once we've got that up and running, actually, if we're looking wider over the wider catchment, we can look at improving crop yields, because we're reducing storm damage to crops, we're capturing water, we're maximizing the crop yields we'll get, because of plant health will be improved, we're getting the right amounts of water at the right times. So we can, so the farmers are getting more money, but also the agri-food chains have less risk, they have more certainty. We can capture that data of about when crops are coming, how much there will be. We can also capture data about the actual farmers themselves. We know what the farmers are doing and how they're doing it. We're lowering the risk because we're using nature-based solutions, natural pest management, capturing that water, reducing storm damage. That means we can get insurance in and loans. That is a valuable commodity. So we can sell those data as that lower risk. So that all feeds back in and makes the city safer. So actually, once the city starts having less damage, it needs less infrastructure maintenance. So that can then be put back into the system to grow more natural systems, and to make it all sort of builds and builds and builds. So it's that sort of, those sorts of ideas which can be very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, Angus. Like, I'm hearing a story where, the industry has to be involved because of existential imperatives. Like, they have like their license to business, their operating business continuity risks, so on and so forth. But it's not just them; it's also everybody in the value chains. So it's everybody across is mitigating the risk, But there's also this livelihoods factor, which you were talking about, where people are involved in creating nature-based solutions, and money is injected into local economies, and it's creating nature-based solutions and creating natural capital, which is paying back for itself as it creates a systems change, and over the course of time, reduces very real risks in terms of urban flooding and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating story, and I think uh, I would really like to see how Viridian and others continue to develop these ideas and engage them into the world. And from the perspective of you being a true thought leader when it comes to this kind of thing, if I had to ask you for three wishes in a perfect world, which would enable you to create and deploy natural capital and all the co-benefits and the systems change which is enabled through this all over the world, and at the scale and at the pace which we need in order to turn the corner on our climate crisis and achieve sustainability, what would your three wishes be?
So 3 wishes from the great green genie.
Yeah.
I think that one would be good data everywhere. We do have unbelievable quantities of data that we can use already, but it's very patchy. So in cities, we can data mine social media and comments, and even sort of cameras on people's dashboards or street cameras to sort of work out where there are problems and where to put solutions. But then just a few miles away, in rural areas, we might not even know what the land's being used for. We might know almost nothing other than we can get from satellites. And if there's no ground trees, that can be a little bit uncertain. So good data that's free to use, it's open source, because people will innovate. If you give them data, if you give them the tools to come up with new ways of thinking, people will do it. And that which feeds back into the collaboration, the co-design. People are very innovative. And so that will make a huge difference. I'd like a supercomputer, please, so that we could crunch endless numbers at really fine detail and get our models perfect with that open source ubiquitous data that we're going to have from the first wish. And I think the last wish would be that people would especially the big multinationals that are really embedded in a lot of the sustainable development projects and a lot of international work, that they would stop using kind of the standard methods to understand what to do where for nature-based solutions, because they don't work very well. And we're by doing it badly, they're losing a lot of opportunities. So as these projects go along, they're almost building in obsolescence because they're just using engineering, or they're putting the wrong type of nature-based solutions, the wrong type of natural processes in the wrong places, and so getting very little returns. So stop people doing that and start using intelligent design systems. So we put the right things in the right places and really maximize the opportunity. So I think those would be my three big wishes of perfect world.
It's been great to hear your thoughts on this, Angus. I think this is certainly a very visionary outlook, and I learned a great deal on this conversation talking to you. And let's hope that these three wishes of yours, somebody out there who's watching this interview perhaps can take some small steps to help make them come true. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, Angus, as always. And I thank you sincerely for coming and agreeing to being interviewed for the DAV Data Solutions Data4SDG Thought Leaders Series. And it's been great to have you.
Thank you, Harry. It's been an absolute honor and delight to be here. And so I say thank you to anyone listening to this as well. And I hope you have found it interesting.